She said Marcus needed my festival ticket more than I did because he understood the deeper artistic frequencies. I stared at Harper, wondering how 3 years of supporting her dreams had led to this moment where she was essentially giving away my birthday gift to her freeloading friend. The whole situation felt surreal, like watching someone methodically dismantle everything I'd built for us. I'm a municipal infrastructure engineer, 29, decent salary around $78,000 annually, stable job designing water treatment systems and road improvements for our mid-sized city. Not glamorous work, but I take genuine pride in building things that matter, systems that keep communities functioning and people healthy. My projects might not hang in galleries, but they serve 30 years instead of 30 minutes of Instagram attention. Harper was 27, an aspiring sculptor who worked part-time at this artisan pottery studio downtown called Earth and Fire, making just enough to cover her phone bill and basic art supplies if she was careful with money, which she rarely was. I'd been covering our $1,200 monthly rent, utilities averaging another $200, groceries for 3 people since Marcus practically lived with us, and most of her expensive sculpture materials for the past year and a half because I genuinely believed in her talent and wanted to support her passion for creating these massive metal installations that required specialized tools and premium materials. She had real skill, possessed this incredible ability to transform raw steel and copper into flowing, organic shapes that somehow captured movement in stillness, pieces that made you stop and stare because they seemed alive despite being metal. Her latest series explored themes of urban decay and renewal, which resonated with my engineering background in ways she probably didn't realize, and I thought we were building something meaningful together, a partnership where my financial stability would give her the creative freedom to pursue art seriously without the crushing pressure of survival jobs that drain artistic energy. Then Marcus entered our lives 3 months ago like a persistent headache that refused to respond to any treatment. He was Harper's college friend from their fine arts program, supposedly a multimedia performance artist specializing in what he called experiential consciousness installations. Though in 3 months of living on my couch I'd never seen him actually perform anything except dramatic monologues about the commodification of creativity and lengthy explanations of why traditional economic structures were incompatible with authentic artistic expression. He'd been officially between living situations since arriving, but really just unwilling to get any regular employment because he claimed traditional jobs would compromise his artistic integrity and disconnect him from the pure creative source that fueled his most important work. I'd come home from 10-hour days of reviewing environmental impact reports and coordinating with construction contractors to find Marcus sprawled across my leather sectional sofa, eating organic groceries I'd purchased, streaming documentaries on my Netflix account, and explaining to Harper how my soul-crushing government job was slowly killing my connection to authentic human experience and limiting my ability to understand art as a transformative force. He had this way of speaking about creativity and artistic vision that made everything practical seem trivial and materialistic, using phrases like corporate enslavement and spiritual authenticity with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about rent deadlines or health insurance premiums, and Harper absorbed every word like gospel truth from an enlightened teacher. I watched her gradually start questioning whether I truly understood her artistic vision, whether my practical engineer's mindset was somehow limiting her growth as an artist, whether someone who spent days calculating load-bearing capacities could ever appreciate the emotional weight of sculptural expression. Marcus would literally roll his eyes whenever I talked about my work projects, as if designing water filtration systems that provided clean drinking water to 50,000 residents was somehow less valuable than his conceptual pieces about post-capitalist consciousness that existed mainly as verbal descriptions and vague sketches in notebooks he carried everywhere but never seemed to actually use for concrete creation. The guy hadn't contributed a single dollar toward groceries, utilities, or household supplies in 3 months, but somehow I was the one who didn't understand the higher purposes of life or the sacred nature of artistic expression. He'd lecture Harper about how my engineering mindset was rooted in capitalist control structures, how infrastructure work was just another form of environmental destruction disguised as progress, completely ignoring the fact that my water treatment designs literally prevented environmental contamination and that my road improvements reduced traffic accidents that killed real people every year. I kept telling myself this arrangement was temporary, that Harper would eventually see through Marcus's pretentious philosophical nonsense and remember that artistic dreams need solid foundations to stand on, that creativity flourishes best when artists don't have to choose between paying rent and buying materials. I thought my patience and unwavering financial support would prove my commitment to her success, show her that genuine love meant providing the practical stability necessary for creativity to flourish without compromise. Every month I transferred money for her art supplies, watching my savings account shrink while her studio space filled with increasingly ambitious metal sculptures, pieces that required expensive welding equipment rentals and specialty materials that cost more than most people's car payments. I researched the best suppliers for her preferred types of steel, learned about different patina techniques so I could understand her artistic process, even helped her transport finished pieces to gallery showings in my truck, all because I believed we were building toward a future where her talent would eventually provide financial returns and artistic recognition. But Marcus had different ideas about what constituted valuable support, constantly suggesting that my practical contributions were actually limiting Harper's growth by making her too comfortable, too dependent on conventional resources instead of learning to create from pure necessity and spiritual drive. He'd tell stories about famous artists who produced their greatest works while living in poverty, as if financial struggle automatically generated creative genius, conveniently ignoring the countless talented artists whose careers were destroyed by inability to afford basic materials and living expenses. I found myself working longer hours partly to escape the tension at home, taking on additional consulting projects to maintain our lifestyle while Marcus consumed resources and Harper absorbed his teachings about authentic artistic suffering being more valuable than bourgeois stability. The worst part was watching Harper begin to adopt his dismissive attitude toward my career, rolling her eyes when I mentioned successful project completions or expressing excitement about new engineering challenges, as if professional satisfaction in practical work was somehow evidence of spiritual bankruptcy. For Harper's birthday in early September, I decided to do something that would prove I understood her artistic passions better than Marcus gave me credit for understanding. I spent weeks researching underground electronic music scenes, discovering that her favorite experimental DJ collective called Neon Pulse was headlining this exclusive 3-day desert festival called Resonance that happened only once every 2 years in the Nevada high desert. Regular tickets had sold out within minutes back in March, but I leveraged connections from my municipal engineering network, specifically a contractor friend who'd worked sound system installations for major venues, to secure 2 VIP passes that cost me $1,800 total. These weren't just admission tickets but premium packages that included backstage access, exclusive camping areas with actual bathroom facilities instead of porta-potties, gourmet food vendors, and access to artist meet and greets that regular festival goers could only dream about experiencing. I spent another 3 weeks coordinating logistics, researching the best camping gear for desert conditions, planning our route through small Nevada towns, and even studying Neon Pulse's discography so I could discuss their evolution from experimental noise to structured ambient compositions intelligently with Harper during the long drive. The morning of her birthday, I presented the VIP passes in a custom-designed wooden box I'd crafted in my garage workshop, along with detailed itineraries for our 3-day romantic desert adventure and professionally printed camping guides I'd compiled from geological surveys of the festival location. Harper's reaction exceeded every expectation I'd harbored about surprising her with something that combined her love of experimental music with my talent for thorough planning and execution. She literally squealed with excitement, something I hadn't heard from her in months, immediately calling her artist friends to share the news and posting Instagram stories about having the most thoughtful boyfriend who actually paid attention to her interests instead of dismissing them as frivolous entertainment. She spent the entire day researching Neon Pulse's latest releases and planning outfits that would photograph well against desert landscapes, her enthusiasm infectious enough that I started feeling genuinely excited about experiencing something completely outside my usual comfort zone of structured environments and predictable schedules. For the first time in months, Marcus seemed genuinely impressed by something I'd accomplished, acknowledging that accessing backstage areas at Resonance required serious connections and cultural knowledge that most people in traditional careers never developed. Harper kept hugging me and thanking me for proving that engineers could understand artistic expression, that practical people could appreciate experimental creativity, that our relationship had room for both stability and adventure in ways that complemented rather than compromised each other's essential natures. I felt vindicated, like I'd finally found the perfect gesture to bridge the gap between my practical worldview and her artistic aspirations, proving that love meant paying attention to your partner's passions even when they existed outside your natural interests or expertise. The festival was still 6 weeks away, giving us plenty of time to plan our desert camping strategy, research the other artists performing, and build anticipation for what I hoped would become a transformative experience that strengthened our relationship and demonstrated my commitment to supporting her creative growth. I researched festival photography techniques so I could document the experience properly, studied desert survival basics to ensure our safety during temperature extremes, and even practiced setting up our tent in my backyard until I could assemble it efficiently in darkness or wind conditions. Harper started involving me in her outfit planning sessions, asking my opinion about practical considerations like sun protection and comfortable walking shoes while maintaining the aesthetic she wanted to achieve for social media documentation of our adventure. She seemed genuinely impressed by my research into the festival's history, how it started as an underground gathering of experimental musicians who wanted to perform in natural acoustic environments that enhanced their electronic compositions, evolving into this exclusive cultural event that attracted artists, musicians, and creative professionals from around the world seeking authentic experiences outside mainstream festival commercialization. I learned that Neon Pulse had specifically chosen this festival for their first live performance of compositions from their upcoming album, making our attendance historically significant for fans who followed their artistic evolution from basement noise experiments to internationally recognized ambient soundscapes. Harper spent hours playing their music while working on her sculptures, explaining how their layered electronic textures influenced her approach to metal surface treatments and patina applications, drawing connections between audio frequency manipulation and visual texture creation that revealed sophisticated understanding of cross-media artistic expression. I found myself actually enjoying their complex compositions, recognizing mathematical patterns in their rhythm structures that reminded me of engineering principles applied to creative expression rather than infrastructure function. Marcus initially seemed pleased about Harper's birthday surprise, even admitting that accessing Resonance VIP areas required cultural connections he didn't possess despite his extensive involvement in underground art scenes throughout college and his supposed expertise in alternative creative communities. He started researching the other artists performing at the festival, discovering several multimedia performers whose work aligned with his stated interests in experiential consciousness installations and boundary-pushing artistic expression that challenged conventional entertainment formats. For several days, our apartment felt harmonious again, with Harper excited about our upcoming adventure and Marcus temporarily distracted from his usual critiques of mainstream success and conventional relationship dynamics that prioritized material comfort over spiritual growth. I thought I'd finally found the perfect solution, a gesture that proved my commitment to Harper's artistic interests while demonstrating that practical people could access exclusive cultural experiences through strategic planning and professional networking rather than just artistic credibility or underground scene connections. Harper posted multiple social media updates about the festival, tagging me in stories about having a supportive partner who invested in shared experiences rather than expecting her to accommodate his interests exclusively, and several of her artist friends commented about wishing their boyfriends understood creative expression well enough to plan meaningful artistic adventures. I felt proud of successfully bridging our different worldviews, creating an opportunity for Harper to experience cutting-edge electronic music in an environment that would inspire her sculptural work while proving that my engineering background could enhance rather than limit our relationship's creative potential. Even my coworkers seemed impressed when I mentioned the festival, with several expressing surprise that someone in municipal infrastructure had access to exclusive electronic music events that typically attracted only industry insiders and serious artistic devotees. Everything changed 3 days after Harper posted about the festival tickets on her Instagram story with hearts and fire emojis, tagging both me and the festival location with captions about having the most thoughtful boyfriend who actually understood her artistic soul. Marcus saw the post while scrolling through social media during one of his extended couch sessions, and his entire demeanor shifted from casual interest to something approaching panic mixed with desperate longing that I'd never seen from him before during his months of philosophical lectures about artistic authenticity and creative expression transcending material concerns. He approached Harper while I was at work reviewing contractor bids for a water main replacement project, catching her during her afternoon sculpture session when she was most receptive to emotional conversations about art and creative inspiration flowing through vulnerable human connections. When I returned home that evening, Harper was sitting at our kitchen table with tear-streaked mascara and that conflicted expression she wore when Marcus had been filling her head with complex theories about artistic sacrifice and authentic creative experience that somehow always concluded with me being inadequate as a partner for someone with serious artistic aspirations. She explained through halting sentences and nervous hand gestures that Marcus had revealed something deeply personal about his relationship with Neon Pulse's music, how their experimental compositions had literally saved him from complete creative breakdown during his darkest period in college when he'd questioned whether pursuing art was worth the financial uncertainty and social marginalization that came with rejecting conventional career paths. According to Harper's emotional retelling of Marcus's confession, he'd discovered Neon Pulse during his sophomore year mental health crisis, when he'd been considering abandoning art entirely and accepting his parents' demands that he switch to business administration or another practical major that would guarantee steady employment and social respectability rather than artistic fulfillment. Their layered electronic soundscapes had provided the spiritual breakthrough he needed to reconnect with his creative purpose, giving him courage to continue pursuing experimental art despite family pressure and financial instability that threatened his ability to afford basic art supplies and studio space rental fees. Harper described how Marcus had broken down crying while explaining that attending Resonance would be spiritually essential for his upcoming multimedia installation project about transformation through artistic adversity. A piece he'd been developing conceptually for months but couldn't complete without experiencing Neon Pulse's live performance in the desert environment that inspired their most transcendent compositions. She said he'd never asked her for anything significant before, despite all the meals and housing I'd provided, and that this was literally his last chance for creative salvation before he'd be forced to abandon art permanently and accept conventional employment that would destroy his connection to authentic creative expression that had sustained him through years of poverty and social rejection. I listened to this elaborate justification while calculating that Marcus had consumed approximately $4,000 worth of groceries, utilities, and household supplies during his 3-month residence on my couch, but apparently asking him to contribute financially was unreasonable while expecting me to sacrifice my birthday gift to Harper was a spiritual necessity. Harper's argument became increasingly emotional as she explained that while I enjoyed electronic music, I didn't understand the deeper artistic frequencies that Marcus experienced, the way certain compositions could literally restructure someone's creative consciousness and provide access to inspiration that transcended ordinary entertainment or recreational music appreciation. She suggested that Marcus should take my ticket instead of her accompanying me, since my presence would somehow dilute the spiritual intensity Marcus needed to complete his artistic transformation, and that true love meant prioritizing the greater artistic good over personal romantic experiences that could be replicated at other times with different music. When I pointed out that these were birthday gifts I'd spent months planning and $1,800 purchasing, Harper became defensive and started crying harder, claiming that I was being selfish and materialistic by focusing on money instead of understanding the collaborative nature of authentic art that required personal sacrifice for the benefit of creative community growth. She accused me of treating the tickets like personal property instead of recognizing them as tools for artistic enlightenment that should be distributed based on spiritual need rather than financial contribution, completely ignoring the irony of someone who'd never paid for concert tickets lecturing me about the proper use of festival access I'd earned through professional networking and careful financial planning. The argument escalated when I mentioned that these tickets represented weeks of research and coordination, plus substantial financial investment that I'd made specifically to create a romantic experience for Harper's birthday celebration, not to subsidize Marcus's creative therapy sessions at my expense while I stayed home alone wondering why my girlfriend prioritized her freeloading friend's spiritual needs over our relationship milestone. Harper responded by suggesting that my attachment to conventional romantic gestures revealed my fundamental misunderstanding of how authentic relationships should support artistic growth within creative communities. That truly enlightened partners would celebrate opportunities to contribute to larger artistic purposes rather than demanding exclusive access to experiences that could benefit multiple people's creative development. She started crying again while explaining that Marcus had opened her eyes to possibilities beyond traditional couple dynamics, showing her that love meant supporting each other's artistic evolution even when it required personal sacrifice, and that my resistance to sharing the festival experience proved I valued possessiveness over genuine creative partnership. I found myself staring at Harper while she delivered this lecture about artistic collaboration and authentic love, realizing that somewhere during Marcus's 3-month residency she'd completely absorbed his worldview about my inadequacy as a partner for someone with serious creative aspirations, adopting his language about spiritual authenticity and artistic transcendence that conveniently always concluded with me providing resources while receiving criticism for expecting basic relationship consideration in return. The most painful part was watching Harper transform my carefully planned birthday surprise into evidence of my selfishness, reframing $1,800 of thoughtful gesture into proof that I didn't understand true artistic generosity. She kept returning to Marcus's supposed spiritual connection with Neon Pulse's music, describing his emotional breakdown in terms that made it sound like I was denying medication to someone with a serious medical condition rather than refusing to give away concert tickets I'd purchased for my girlfriend's birthday celebration. I realized that Harper had fundamentally redefined our entire relationship in terms that made my contributions invisible while positioning Marcus's needs as paramount, creating a framework where my practical support was expected and unacknowledged while his artistic requirements became emergencies that demanded immediate accommodation regardless of cost or personal sacrifice. I looked at Harper sitting across from me with mascara streaks and that expectant expression she wore when waiting for me to accommodate another one of Marcus's needs, and something inside me shifted from disappointment to cold calculation that felt surprisingly liberating after months of emotional manipulation disguised as artistic enlightenment. I told her she was absolutely right about the tickets being her birthday gift and that Marcus clearly needed the spiritual experience more than I did, watching relief flood her face as she prepared to launch into grateful explanations about artistic collaboration and authentic partnership that prioritized creative growth over conventional romantic expectations. Instead of arguing or expressing hurt feelings that would only provide ammunition for more lectures about my materialistic worldview and spiritual inadequacy, I simply agreed with everything she'd said and suggested we start planning Marcus's festival experience immediately to ensure he received maximum artistic benefit from this opportunity for creative salvation. Harper seemed almost suspicious of my calm acceptance, probably expecting the emotional scene that would allow her to position herself as the reasonable partner dealing with my selfish resistance to supporting important artistic endeavors, but I maintained perfect composure while internally activating the project management skills that had made me successful in municipal engineering. Over the next 4 days, while Harper and Marcus excitedly researched Neon Pulse's discography and planned their desert adventure with the intensity of people embarking on a spiritual pilgrimage, I quietly orchestrated the complete dissolution of our shared life with the systematic precision I normally applied to infrastructure coordination projects. I started by securing a lease on a modern loft apartment across town that I'd been researching for months as a potential upgrade from our current place, using my improved credit score and stable employment history to fast-track the application process while Harper was at the pottery studio and Marcus was conducting his daily philosophical discussions with other unemployed artists at nearby coffee shops. The new apartment was everything our current place wasn't, spacious and clean with excellent natural lighting, updated appliances, and a dedicated workspace where I could set up a proper home office without worrying about someone using my desk as a platform for artistic manifestos about the spiritual bankruptcy of traditional career success. I arranged for early lease termination at our current apartment, leveraging my positive rental history and relationship with the property management company to negotiate an exit strategy that would take effect the Monday after the festival weekend, giving Harper and Marcus exactly 0 time to process what was happening before facing the practical consequences of their artistic collaboration. The most satisfying part was systematically cataloging every item in our apartment that I'd purchased over 3 years of supporting Harper's lifestyle and artistic ambitions. From major appliances and electronics to kitchen supplies and furniture that had transformed her bare studio apartment into a comfortable home where Marcus could freeload without contributing anything except criticism of my supposed spiritual limitations. I coordinated with professional movers during Harper's work hours, timing their visits to coincide with her pottery studio shifts and Marcus's regular absence for what he called urban exploration sessions, but which mainly involved wandering around downtown areas photographing abandoned buildings for his non-existent multimedia installations. Using detailed inventory lists I'd created during evening hours while Harper and Marcus planned their festival experience, the movers systematically removed my contributions to our shared domestic space with military efficiency that would have impressed my engineering colleagues who'd worked on large-scale infrastructure relocations. Every piece of furniture I'd bought, every kitchen appliance I'd researched and purchased for our cooking experiments, every electronic device that had made our apartment feel modern and comfortable, every book from my personal library, every tool from my workshop area, every camping gear item I'd accumulated for outdoor adventures Harper had claimed to enjoy before Marcus convinced her that nature appreciation was another form of bourgeois escapism that authentic artists transcended through urban aesthetic experiences. I even arranged for disconnection of utilities and services that were in my name, ensuring that Harper would return from her spiritual desert experience to discover not just an empty apartment but one without electricity, internet, or hot water until she figured out how to establish new accounts with her pottery studio income. The logistics required careful coordination with multiple service providers and moving companies, but I approached it with the same methodical planning I applied to municipal water system upgrades, creating detailed timelines and backup contingencies to ensure flawless execution while Harper and Marcus remained completely oblivious to the infrastructure dismantling happening around their artistic preparations. On Thursday, the day before their departure for the Desert Festival, I finalized the last details of my exit strategy while Harper packed vintage clothes and Marcus gathered what he called ceremonial accessories for his spiritual encounter with Neon Pulse's transformative electronic compositions that would allegedly complete his artistic evolution from theoretical concepts to concrete creative expression. I watched them prepare for their weekend of artistic enlightenment with the detached fascination of someone observing a social experiment about the relationship between financial dependency and creative authenticity, noting how neither of them considered practical concerns like tent setup procedures or water conservation strategies that would be essential for desert survival. Harper kept thanking me for being so understanding about Marcus's spiritual needs while simultaneously making subtle comments about how this experience might teach me valuable lessons about prioritizing artistic growth over material attachments, apparently still expecting that I'd use their absence for personal reflection about my inadequacy as a partner for someone with serious creative aspirations. Friday morning arrived with Harper and Marcus loading camping supplies into my truck with the excited energy of people embarking on a transformative adventure, discussing Neon Pulse's artistic evolution and the historical significance of experiencing experimental electronic music in desert environments. I helped them pack with careful attention to detail, ensuring they had adequate supplies for 3 days of camping while internally counting down hours until I could begin the final phase of furniture removal that would complete my systematic withdrawal from our shared domestic arrangement. Harper kissed me goodbye with unusual affection, probably feeling guilty about prioritizing Marcus's needs but still convinced that her choice represented artistic wisdom rather than relationship betrayal, telling me she loved me and hoped I'd use the weekend for personal growth. I waved goodbye as they drove away in my truck loaded with camping gear toward their spiritual desert experience, then immediately activated the final phase of my departure strategy with professional efficiency that impressed even the moving crew I'd hired for weekend overtime rates. The remaining furniture removal took exactly 4 hours, systematically emptying our apartment of every item I'd purchased during 3 years of supporting Harper's artistic dreams and Marcus's philosophical freeloading. Harper returned from the Resonance Festival on Monday evening to discover what could only be described as the aftermath of a precisely executed domestic evacuation, walking into an apartment that had been transformed from a comfortable shared living space into something resembling a condemned property awaiting demolition. I wasn't there to witness her reaction personally, but I'd left a single handwritten note on the kitchen counter that read, "Marcus can keep the tickets and you, lease ends Monday," signed with just the letter C because even my name felt like more consideration than the situation warranted after 3 years of gradually escalating disrespect disguised as artistic enlightenment. According to mutual friends who later provided updates I hadn't requested, Harper spent the first hour walking through empty rooms trying to process how someone could systematically remove an entire household worth of furniture, appliances, and personal belongings without leaving any trace of their presence except dust outlines on hardwood floors where major pieces had stood for years. She'd called my phone repeatedly throughout the evening and into the next morning, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that cycled through confusion, anger, desperation, and finally acceptance that I'd demonstrated a level of strategic planning capability she'd apparently never recognized despite my professional background in large-scale infrastructure coordination and project management. Marcus had apparently tried to comfort her with philosophical observations about the impermanence of material possessions and how my dramatic departure proved his theories about the spiritual bankruptcy of people who prioritized conventional stability over authentic creative expression. But his lectures about artistic transcendence rang hollow when delivered in an unfurnished apartment without electricity or hot water where they had to sit on the floor because even Harper's cheap futon looked pathetic in the echoing emptiness I'd created through systematic resource withdrawal. Harper found herself forced to crash with Marcus at his shared artist commune, a converted warehouse in an industrial district where 8 aspiring creatives had pooled resources to afford a space with inconsistent electricity, 1 bathroom shared among all residents, and heating that functioned only when someone remembered to pay the utility bills that were always in dispute due to collective decision-making processes that prioritized artistic discussion over practical maintenance. Responsibilities. The transition from our comfortable apartment with modern appliances and reliable utilities to communal living conditions where basic amenities required group negotiations and shared resources apparently provided Harper with immediate perspective about the difference between romantic support and survival-level accommodation that barely met minimum housing standards. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my new loft apartment with its excellent natural lighting, updated kitchen appliances, and dedicated workspace where I could focus on advancing my engineering career without daily interruptions from philosophical lectures about my supposed spiritual inadequacy and creative limitations that had been slowly eroding my professional confidence and personal satisfaction. Within 2 weeks of my strategic departure, I'd received recognition at work for improved focus and productivity on a major water treatment facility upgrade project that had been stalled for months while I'd been distracted by domestic tensions and constant criticism of my career choices from unemployed artists who'd never contributed anything meaningful to functional infrastructure that served actual community needs. I was saving approximately $2,500 monthly by eliminating expenses related to supporting Harper's art supplies, Marcus's food consumption, and lifestyle maintenance costs for people who'd gradually convinced me that my financial contributions were evidence of materialistic thinking rather than genuine partnership investment that deserved basic appreciation and reciprocal consideration. The financial relief was significant, but the psychological benefits of living without constant criticism and manipulation disguised as artistic enlightenment proved even more valuable for restoring confidence in my professional abilities and personal judgment that had been systematically undermined through months of daily exposure to people who viewed practical success as spiritual failure and conventional career achievement as creative death that prevented access to authentic artistic expression and meaningful human connection through shared poverty and rejection of bourgeois comfort standards. Harper's situation deteriorated rapidly once she discovered that Marcus's romantic interest had been largely theoretical and dependent on having a comfortable apartment where he could conduct his artistic discussions without worrying about basic survival needs like reliable shelter and consistent meals that required actual financial planning rather than philosophical attitudes about material transcendence. Within 6 weeks of the festival, Marcus had begun a romantic involvement with a 22-year-old painter named Luna who'd recently joined their artist commune with inherited money from her grandmother's estate, providing him access to someone who could fund his experimental art projects without expecting practical contributions or relationship commitment that might interfere with his creative development and spiritual growth through artistic community engagement. Harper found herself completely abandoned by the same person who'd convinced her to sacrifice a stable relationship for artistic collaboration, discovering that Marcus's philosophical commitment to shared artistic struggle evaporated instantly when someone with better financial resources became available for exploitation. The irony was apparently lost on neither Harper nor the other commune residents who watched Marcus transition from lectures about authentic artistic suffering to enthusiastic discussions of Luna's inherited wealth and its potential for funding multimedia installations. Harper had to take on additional shifts at the pottery studio to afford her share of commune expenses while watching Marcus and Luna plan elaborate art projects funded by inheritance money, experiencing firsthand the difference between someone who talks about artistic authenticity and someone who actually works to support creative endeavors through consistent financial contribution and practical resource management. The warehouse living conditions proved particularly challenging during winter months when heating costs rose beyond what the commune's collective budget could accommodate, leading to extended discussions about artistic sacrifice that provided no actual warmth during below-freezing nights when residents had to sleep in multiple layers while Marcus and Luna retreated to Luna's heated studio space funded by inheritance money. Harper began working overtime at Earth and Fire Pottery Studio, creating functional ceramic pieces for local restaurants and coffee shops to generate income that could cover basic living expenses while her artistic sculpture work remained financially unproductive and increasingly difficult to pursue without dedicated workspace and expensive materials. The physical demands of increased pottery production combined with inadequate nutrition from shared commune meals gradually took their toll on Harper's health and energy levels, making it increasingly difficult to maintain optimistic attitudes about artistic community living that had initially attracted her to Marcus's philosophical worldview about creative authenticity. 4 months after my strategic departure from our shared apartment, Harper ambushed me outside the municipal engineering building where I worked, appearing from behind a concrete pillar in the parking garage like someone who'd been conducting surveillance for weeks to determine my daily schedule and optimal interception points. She looked absolutely terrible, having lost at least 20 pounds from her already petite frame, wearing clothes that hung loose and shapeless, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested months of inadequate sleep and chronic stress that had aged her years beyond the time since our relationship ended. Her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that revealed grown-out roots and split ends, while her complexion had the sallow quality of someone surviving on minimal nutrition and maximum anxiety about basic survival needs that artistic communities rarely addressed through philosophical discussions about material transcendence. I was walking to my truck after a particularly successful project meeting where my water treatment facility designs had received approval for implementation across 3 municipal districts, feeling genuinely satisfied with professional accomplishments that represented tangible improvements to community infrastructure and public health outcomes that served thousands of residents daily. Harper stepped into my path with the desperate energy of someone who'd rehearsed this confrontation for weeks, probably practicing arguments and emotional appeals designed to convince me that our relationship deserved another chance despite her previous choice to prioritize Marcus's spiritual needs over our 3-year partnership investment and shared domestic stability. Her opening words came in a rush of barely controlled panic, explaining how Marcus had abandoned her completely for Luna and her inheritance money, how the commune living conditions had become unbearable during winter months when heating costs exceeded collective budget capabilities, and how she'd been forced to work double shifts at the pottery studio just to afford her share of basic survival expenses while watching other residents pursue artistic projects she could no longer afford to attempt. She tearfully apologized for everything that had happened with the festival tickets and Marcus's manipulation of her emotions, claiming she'd been confused and scared about artistic authenticity versus practical relationship stability, that Marcus had convinced her I represented limitations on her creative growth when actually I'd provided the foundation that made artistic exploration possible without survival-level stress about housing and food security. Harper begged for reconciliation with the desperate intensity of someone who discovered that philosophical attitudes about material transcendence provided no actual protection against hunger, cold, or social isolation when artistic community support proved conditional on financial contribution and romantic availability rather than genuine creative collaboration and mutual care for member welfare. She kept repeating that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she understood now how valuable our relationship had been, how my practical support had enabled rather than limited her artistic development, and how Marcus's teachings about authentic creative expression had been manipulative nonsense designed to exploit her insecurities about conventional relationship success and bourgeois comfort that actually provided necessary stability for sustained creative work. I listened to her emotional breakdown with the same calm analytical approach I applied to engineering problems that required objective assessment rather than emotional reaction, noting how her desperation reflected systematic consequences of choices made through philosophical reasoning that ignored practical realities about resource management and mutual relationship responsibility that sustained long-term partnership success. When Harper finished her prepared speech about recognizing my worth and wanting to rebuild what we'd shared, I responded with quiet firmness that surprised even me with its complete absence of anger or emotional investment in her current suffering despite months of previous concern about her welfare and artistic success. I explained that her choice to give away my festival ticket hadn't been a mistake but a deliberate decision that revealed her fundamental view of me as a financial resource rather than a romantic partner whose feelings and interests deserved equal consideration in relationship decisions that affected both our futures and shared experiences we'd planned together. Harper tried to interrupt with explanations about Marcus's manipulation and her confusion about artistic priorities, but I continued speaking with the measured tone I used for presenting engineering proposals to city council members who needed clear information rather than emotional appeals to make informed decisions about infrastructure investments and community development projects. I told her that giving away the ticket wasn't the real problem but rather the symptom of a deeper issue about how she'd learned to see our relationship as a support system for her individual goals rather than a partnership where both people contributed meaningfully to shared success and mutual growth that benefited everyone involved rather than just one person's creative aspirations at the expense of the other's emotional well-being and practical contribution to domestic stability. Harper's face crumpled as she processed my explanation, probably realizing for the first time that her actions had consequences beyond temporary inconvenience and that some decisions created permanent changes in how other people viewed relationship potential and personal character that couldn't be undone through apologies or promises of future improvement. When Harper asked desperately where she was supposed to go and what she was supposed to do without any support system, I maintained the same calm boundary-setting tone I developed through municipal budget meetings where emotional appeals had to be separated from practical decisions. I told her that figuring out independent survival was exactly the authentic artistic experience Marcus had always claimed she needed, that learning to support herself would provide the creative authenticity she'd been seeking through philosophical discussions about material transcendence. She begged me to remember the good times we'd shared, the artistic conversations and creative inspiration, the domestic comfort that had made our relationship meaningful before Marcus's influence had corrupted her perspective about practical support representing spiritual limitation rather than genuine care. I acknowledged that we'd had good moments together, particularly early in our relationship when Harper had seemed genuinely grateful for my support and interested in building something collaborative rather than extractive, but explained that those memories couldn't change the fundamental reality that she'd chosen to prioritize someone else's needs over our partnership when presented with a clear choice between loyalty and convenience. Harper's final desperate attempt involved pointing out that Marcus had used both of us for personal benefit, that we'd been victims of his manipulation rather than willing participants in relationship destruction, and that recognizing our shared experience should create solidarity rather than permanent separation between people who genuinely cared about each other. I considered her argument with the same methodical analysis I applied to contract negotiations, noting that while Marcus had certainly been manipulative, Harper's response to his influence had revealed pre-existing attitudes about our relationship that made reconciliation impossible regardless of outside interference. When Harper broke down completely and mentioned having nowhere to go, I maintained my boundaries, wishing her well before walking to my truck and driving away without looking back. 2 years after that final parking garage confrontation with Harper, I found myself standing at another music festival, but this time everything felt completely different because I was there with someone who genuinely wanted to experience it together rather than using my planning abilities and financial resources as stepping stones toward abandoning me for supposedly better opportunities. I'd been promoted to senior municipal engineer with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities for overseeing infrastructure development across multiple city districts, work that provided genuine satisfaction because my designs improved thousands of people's daily lives through reliable water systems, efficient traffic flow, and sustainable urban planning that balanced environmental concerns with practical community needs. Sophia Chen was everything Harper hadn't been, a successful landscape architect who owned her own firm specializing in sustainable urban green spaces and ecological restoration projects that complemented my infrastructure work in ways that created natural professional collaboration between equals rather than financial dependence disguised as artistic partnership. She'd surprised me for my birthday with tickets to Electric Gardens, a different electronic music festival that featured both established artists and emerging experimental composers, but instead of expecting me to fund her artistic enlightenment, Sophia had purchased the tickets herself and spent weeks researching the performers because she wanted to understand something I enjoyed rather than using my interests as vehicles for her own agenda. The contrast with my relationship with Harper was so stark it felt like comparing two completely different species of human interaction, one based on mutual respect and genuine curiosity about each other's passions versus another built on systematic exploitation disguised as romantic partnership and artistic collaboration that prioritized individual benefit over shared growth and reciprocal consideration. At the festival, Sophia held my hand during a beautiful sunset set by an ambient electronic duo called Crystalline Echoes, mentioning that she'd been reading about how electronic music composition techniques could influence landscape design through rhythm patterns and spatial flow concepts that translated between audio and visual artistic expression in ways that enhanced both mediums. I realized that this was what authentic partnership looked like. Someone who invested effort in understanding my interests because she valued my happiness rather than someone who viewed my enthusiasms as obstacles to her own creative development that needed to be overcome through philosophical manipulation and emotional guilt about spiritual inadequacy. During intermission between sets, I learned through mutual friends who attended the festival that Marcus had been arrested 6 months earlier for vandalizing a downtown sculpture installation he'd claimed was representing corporate oppression of authentic artistic expression, apparently spray painting political slogans across a public art piece that had been commissioned through legitimate municipal arts funding and community input processes. The same friends mentioned that Harper had moved back with her parents in a small town 3 hours away, working at a local pottery studio for minimum wage while living in her childhood bedroom and apparently struggling with depression and financial instability that made independent living impossible despite all her previous lectures about authentic artistic experience requiring rejection of bourgeois comfort and conventional relationship security. I felt no satisfaction hearing about Harper's continued difficulties, just distant sympathy for someone who'd made choices that led to predictable consequences, like observing the results of a poorly planned construction project that collapsed due to inadequate foundation work rather than external factors beyond anyone's reasonable control or prediction capability. Sophia noticed my momentary distraction and asked if everything was okay, responding to my brief explanation about Harper with thoughtful questions about how difficult relationships end and whether I felt completely resolved about our past together, demonstrating the kind of emotional intelligence and genuine concern for my well-being that had been completely absent from my previous relationship experience. I told her honestly that hearing about Harper mostly made me grateful for how different our partnership was, how much I appreciated being with someone who viewed my practical contributions as valuable rather than limiting, someone who brought her own success and independence to our relationship instead of expecting me to provide foundation for her individual growth while receiving criticism for every gesture of support and care I attempted to offer. As Crystalline Echoes began their second set with layered compositions that built from simple electronic tones into complex harmonic structures, Sophia squeezed my hand and mentioned that she'd been researching the artists all month because she wanted our festival experience to be meaningful for both of us rather than just entertainment I'd provided for her benefit without expecting reciprocal investment in shared enjoyment. I looked around at the festival crowd dancing to experimental electronic music under star-filled desert skies and realized that the true victory wasn't Harper's downfall or Marcus's legal troubles, but finding someone who valued partnership over personal advantage. Someone who contributed to our relationship's success instead of systematically dismantling my confidence and financial stability through philosophical arguments about my supposed spiritual inadequacy and creative limitations. Sophia had brought her own camping gear, insisted on splitting all festival expenses equally, and approached our weekend adventure with the same professional competence she applied to landscape architecture projects, demonstrating that successful people could appreciate experimental art without using artistic appreciation as justification for financial exploitation. The difference in energy was remarkable, attending a festival with someone who wanted to be there with me specifically rather than someone who viewed my presence as potentially limiting her artistic experience and spiritual growth. During late-night electronic sets, when complex rhythms created hypnotic atmospheric experiences, Sophia would point out connections between audio patterns and visual design principles she used in ecological restoration projects, sharing insights that revealed genuine intellectual curiosity about artistic expression rather than using art appreciation as social signaling about superior cultural sophistication. I found myself genuinely enjoying experimental music for the first time in years, no longer analyzing whether my appreciation was sophisticated enough to merit attending exclusive cultural events or whether my engineering background prevented me from accessing deeper artistic frequencies. The festival weekend became a celebration of partnership rather than a test of worthiness, with Sophia treating our shared experience as something to build together rather than something she deserved based on her artistic sensibilities and my obligation to provide access to cultural opportunities. On our final morning at the festival, while packing camping equipment with efficient teamwork, Sophia mentioned that she'd been thinking about planning our own music and art festival experience for next year, researching venues and artists whose work intersected with both electronic composition and environmental design concepts that could inspire collaborative projects between our professional specializations. I realized that this was what healthy relationship planning looked like. Two people contributing ideas and resources toward shared goals that enhanced both partners' lives rather than one person providing foundation while the other pursued individual dreams that required systematic extraction of support without reciprocal investment. The drive home took us through small desert towns that reminded me of the community infrastructure projects I worked on daily, water treatment facilities and road systems that connected rural areas to larger municipal networks, practical engineering that enabled artistic communities and cultural events to exist by providing reliable utilities that festival organizers took for granted.